In a dimly lit room in Seville, 1481, an old woman watches her neighbor's house through a crack in her shutters. She's counting how many times they change their bedsheets, what meat they avoid, whether smoke rises from their chimney on Saturdays. She's not being nosy. She's gathering evidence that will send her neighbors to the flames. Welcome to the Spanish Inquisition, where your grandmother could be your executioner, and washing your hands too often could get you burned alive. Nobody expected it. Everyone expected it every single day. That was the point. Spain, 1478. Three things collided to create Europe's most notorious religious tribunal. First, Spain had just unified under Isabella and Ferdinand, the Catholic monarchs, who needed a common enemy to solidify their power. Second, Spain had Europe's largest population of converted Jews and Muslims, conversos and Moriscos, whose loyalty was constantly questioned. Third, the church needed money, and confiscating heretics' property was wonderfully profitable. This wasn't just about faith, it was about power, paranoia, and profit. A deadly combination that would fuel centuries of persecution and shape the future of a nation. What your history teacher probably didn't explain is that the Spanish Inquisition wasn't really about religion. It was about blood purity, social control, and paranoid nationalism disguised as faith. The Spain that had once been a beacon of religious tolerance, where Jews, Muslims, and Christians had coexisted for centuries, was about to become the prototype for modern totalitarian surveillance. The trigger for this transformation was a potent mix of envy and debt. Many conversos had become successful merchants and doctors, and old Christian families owed them money. What better way to erase your debts than to have your creditor burned? Enter Tomás de Torquemada, a name that still makes Spanish children shudder. Confessor to Queen Isabella, this Dominican friar was himself from a converso family. His grandmother was Jewish. Perhaps that's why he became the most ruthless hunter of secret Jews. Nobody persecutes like the converted. Torquemada didn't invent torture, but his innovation was bureaucracy. He created a systematic machine of terror with instruction manuals, standardized procedures, and performance metrics. The Inquisition kept detailed records of everything: what victims wore, what they said under torture, how long they screamed, everything except mercy. His masterpiece was the Instrucciones, a handbook for inquisitors that reads like a medieval FBI manual. It detailed how to identify secret Jews. Do they avoid pork? Do they wash corpses? Secret Muslims? Do they wash before prayer? Do they avoid wine? Every cultural habit became potential evidence, and every tradition became treason. Torquemada's true genius, however, was making everyone complicit. The Edict of Faith required all Christians to report suspected heretics within 6 days. Failure to report was itself heresy. Your choice was simple: become an informer or become a suspect. Most chose the former. When the Inquisition arrived in a town, they announced a 30-day term of grace. Confess your heresies now, denounce others, and receive mercy. The rush to confess was a stampede. In Toledo, 2,400 people confessed in the first 3 months. But confession wasn't enough. You had to name accomplices. No accomplices? That itself was suspicious. The accused never knew their accusers. Witnesses testified behind screens with disguised voices. You could be condemned by someone who owed you money, coveted your wife, or simply wanted your job. All testimony, even from criminals, was considered holy. Here's a detail that chills me. The Inquisition charged rent. If you were arrested, you paid for your own imprisonment. Your family was billed for your food, your chains, even the wood that would burn you. The rich got private cells with windows, while the poor rotted in darkness. Some families went bankrupt, keeping relatives alive in prison, only to watch them burn anyway. The torture chambers were precisely regulated. The rack, the strappado, and the water torture each had specific guidelines. Physicians attended sessions, checking pulses to ensure victims stayed conscious enough to confess. The auto da fe, act of faith, was the Inquisition's masterpiece of psychological warfare. These weren't simple executions. They were elaborate theatrical productions designed to demonstrate the triumph of faith over heresy. Picture this. Dawn, Toledo, 1486. Church bells ring, and processions begin with monks chanting and nobles in their finest clothes. The condemned march wearing San Benitos, yellow robes painted with flames and devils. Flames pointing downward meant you'd be strangled before burning. Flames pointing upward meant you would burn alive. It was a terrifying public spectacle of power. The ceremony began with a mass that lasted for hours, with sermons detailing each prisoner's crimes. The condemned stood on scaffolds, displayed like trophies. Some were gagged, their blasphemies deemed too dangerous for the crowd to hear. The crowd brought food and wine, turning the event into a form of religious entertainment. Those who confessed received their punishments: flogging, galley slavery, or social death. Their families marked for generations. They were the lucky ones. They got to live, but their honor and future were destroyed, a constant warning to others about the price of dissent. Finally came the relaxation, a gentle word for horror. The unrepentant were relaxed to secular authorities for burning. The church claimed it didn't kill, a theological loophole that let clergy sleep at night. They simply determined guilt. The state handled the burning. The Inquisition's primary victims weren't actually practicing Jews or Muslims who had been expelled. The victims were conversos and Moriscos, Christians of Jewish and Muslim descent. Their crime was not their belief, but having the wrong ancestors. An entire culture was criminalized, from bathing too often to avoiding pork. The most tragic case might be the Carvajal family of Mexico. Luis de Carvajal, a conquistador and governor, was a faithful Catholic, but his sister's family were secret Jews. When discovered, the entire extended family was arrested. Those who confessed were strangled, and those who didn't burned alive. Luis himself died in prison, broken by the knowledge that his success had brought his family to the New World, only to die at the hands of the very faith he served. This story highlights how the Inquisition's paranoia and cruelty reached across the Atlantic into the Spanish colonies. The Inquisition was fantastically profitable. When someone was convicted, the crown took their property, the church got a cut, and inquisitors received salaries from the confiscations. This created perverse incentives. Poor heretics were boring, but rich heretics were fascinating. In Toledo, 88% of those investigated were wealthy merchants. The Inquisition targeted entire commercial networks, destroying Spain's middle class. Jewish and converso merchants had run Spain's economy. Their persecution created a commercial vacuum from which the nation never fully recovered, proving the economic motives behind the religious fervor. The Spanish Inquisition pioneered the modern surveillance state. They created files on thousands of families, tracking bloodlines for generations. These proofs of purity, limpieza de sangre, determined everything: your career, your marriage, your travel. One Jewish great-great-grandmother could destroy your life. Lay servants of the Inquisition, known as familiares, were everywhere. There were 20,000 in Spain. Your baker, your priest, your brother could be one. You never knew who was watching or who would make the next denunciation. Trust died, and Spain became a nation of watchers. Children were trained to inform on parents, servants on masters, and wives on husbands. The Inquisition even used information from sacred confessions as evidence against the accused. Theological consultants, or calificadores, created an entire pseudoscience of religious deviance. Did you sigh when hearing Jesus' name, a sign of Jewish heritage? Did you smile during Mass? Moorish tendencies. The sacred seal of confession meant nothing when heresy was involved. Families fractured under the strain of constant suspicion, and the very fabric of society was torn apart by state-sponsored paranoia. The Spanish Inquisition didn't end with a bang, but a whimper. By the 1700s, Enlightenment ideas made religious persecution unfashionable. The Inquisition adapted, hunting Freemasons and readers of prohibited books instead of secret Jews, but its fire was dying. Napoleon's invasion in 1808 temporarily abolished it. The last person executed for heresy was Cayetano Ripoll in 1826, a schoolteacher whose crime was teaching deist ideas. The Inquisition was finally abolished in 1834, after killing thousands directly and destroying hundreds of thousands of lives through imprisonment and social death. The Inquisition didn't just kill people, it killed possibilities. Spain expelled its Jews and Muslims, losing its doctors, translators, and merchants. It created a culture where curiosity was dangerous and questioning equaled heresy. While Northern Europe embraced science and commerce, Spain clung to blood purity and religious conformity. The economic impact was catastrophic, turning Europe's richest nation into one of its poorest. The social impact was worse, creating a horror of manual labor and an obsession with honor that replaced entrepreneurship. Better to starve nobly than to work shamefully. The Spanish Inquisition wasn't medieval barbarism. It was modern efficiency applied to ancient hatred. It created the template for every totalitarian nightmare that followed. Surveillance networks, racial purity laws, bureaucratized murder, and neighbors denouncing neighbors. When we joke, nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition, we're wrong. Everybody expected it. They heard the bells announcing its arrival. They saw neighbors disappear. They smelled the smoke from the burning grounds. They expected it every day for 356 years. That constant normalized terror was the entire point of its existence.